for the late start here. We are on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Base 31b, and we're learning this Gemara about the lulav that is yavesh, that is dried out. And the dried out lulav, we brought a brisa that says it's a machlokes. The first opinion, which we generally assume is the rabbis, doesn't give a name. The first opinion is that a dried out lulav is invalid. And we saw that in the Mishnah as well, in our Mishnah. And the brisa adds a new opinion, and that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And he said a dried out lulav is kosher. And the Gemara brought Rava's way of explaining this argument, and that the issue that is at hand, the issue at hand is the fact that it does say hadar by the esrog, but it does not say it by the lulav. And hadar means beautiful. And so therefore, there's room to say that you learn the lulav from the esrog, and there's room to say maybe you don't. And this would be the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't learn the lulav from the esrog, and the rabbis learn it from the esrog. How do they learn it? It's called a hekesh. You have a hekesh. Rabbi Yehuda didn't have that hekesh. The Gemara brought questions on this understanding that Rava, according to Rava, what comes out is that everyone would agree that an esrog that's dried out is invalid. The esrog has to be hadar. The lulav, we don't know if we compare it connected to the esrog. So the lulav, there's room, there's wiggle room, there's an argument. The esrog, everyone would agree, and he says this clearly. Rava's explanation, he spells this out. The way Rava explains it, he spells out that by esrog, no one would argue. The Gemara asks questions on this because we do find hints to the fact that, number one, lulav maybe does have rules of hadar. We have some brisas or teseftas, mishnahs, where it seems the Mishnah said Yagdenu Mil Maila, you have to tie it to that. Rabbi Yehuda holds you have the lulav's branches are spread out, you got to tie them up. It sounds like hadar. You need hadar, even Rabbi Yehuda. So that is a question on the way Rav explained it. The Gemara gave an answer that it's kapois. The word kapois tomorrow means tied together. So that's how Rabbi Yehuda understands, not because of hadar. He doesn't hold of hadar. The Gemara says, what do you mean? What about the, we have another source. We have a einoigden as halulav ella b'minoi. You have to use the one of the species of the lulav hadasim aravas. One of those species is what you use to tie it together. You see, it has to be hadar. But it says no. That's we find that you could even tie it with things that aren't so pretty, like sieve. Sieve is some type of ivy that grows around it. I translate it as fiber, but I don't know if that's the correct term. But it's something that grows around it, around the palm tree. And then ikra de dikla. Actually, I have to correct myself because Rashi here says ikra de dikla. It doesn't mean the root; it means the bark of the dekel. Ikar could mean theoretically could mean a root. But Rashi translates it to be the bark of the klipa of the dekel. So the minha klipa from the bark, from the peel, and so you see that it doesn't have to be hadar. So this is the Gemara's answer that he holds you need to use those species, but it's not because of beauty. It's because you don't want to add another species, and it will be considered baltoisif. That was the understanding. Now, then it mentions about an esrog. An esrog, do you need it to be hadar? That was the Gemara's question. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold a esrog needs hadar? We have proof, so now we shift the questions the opposite direction. First, we were asking lulav, even Rabbi Yehuda holds it needs hadar. Now we're jumping, the other way and saying even esrog doesn't need to be hadar. You see that Reb Yehuda seems to hold that even if it's af yavation is kosher, even yavation. He brings a number of cases, but the final case that he says, the final point, this is this Tosefta that the Gemara brings, that it shows that even dried out is kosher, and the Gemara assumes that means an esrog, and that would be shifting the questions the opposite direction, saying that Reb Yehuda doesn't even hold of hadar by an esrog. So you're saying he doesn't hold of it by a lulav because he doesn't compare lulav to esrog. No, even esrog he doesn't seem to hold of it, because even an esrog that's dried out is kosher. The Gemara answers that really that's a case that's not talking about esrog, that's talking about lulav. In other words, it's a little vague in the Tosefta what that's going on. The statement that even dried out is kosher, you could learn it on an esrog, you could read it that way, but not necessarily is that the meaning of the Tosefta. So it was a good thought that's referring to esrog, but it's not. It doesn't have to learn it that way. And so the Gemara says that you can't prove that Reb Yehuda holds that you need hadar, that you don't need hadar by an esrog, because you could say that case is talking about the lulav or the hadassim and arava. Is not necessarily is it going back on the esrog, and so it's not clear from there that Reb Yehuda disagrees with hadar, that he holds you don't need hadar even by an esrog. No, he holds you need hadar by an esrog. By a lulav, maybe he doesn't hold it. So now this was a very interesting discussion right here, where we had Reb Yehuda and the rabbis arguing about a case of a case of a dried out lulav. Initially, the Gemara thought it meant an esrog, but the Gemara, which would mean all of the species. The Gemara's conclusion is that it's not talking about an esrog, but the Gemara mentions, it says the Tosefta brings a story. Reb Yehuda, he brings a story to prove his point. And what's the story he brings? He brings a story that people used to inherit their lulavim to the grandchildren. The grandchildren would inherit their lulavim, which means that dried out must be kosher. This is the story. What do the rabbis say to that? Sounds like a good proof, huh? The grandchildren, this is what they used to do. It sounds like generations they were doing this. They were inheriting people's lulav. It sounds like lulav. From my experience, a lulav lasts for about a week or two, and that's about it. Afterwards, pretty dried out. So, what does what do the rabbis say about this story? Sounds like a dried out lulav should be good. And what's the conclusion? The rabbis tell Reb Yehuda, you can't bring a proof. That's called a shas hadchak. That's called a shas hadchak, a time of great need. So what is so interesting about this story and about this discussion here is that in halacha, Jewish law, there's normally two sides to the coin. There's the preferable way of doing the mitzvah, and then there's the after the fact, you do it, it's kosher. This was okay. It would have been better to do it maybe another way, but then you have after the fact, you did it this way, it's kosher. Anything that falls outside of those two categories normally is it's not kosher. This is not acceptable. You didn't do it. In here, what we're seeing is there seems to be three levels, not two. It's not there's preferable and then there's after the fact. There seems to be a third option, that something could be not good to do preferably. It's not the right way to do it. Even after the fact, you're really going to have to go back and do it again right in a correct way. But in a shas hadachak, in a time of great need, then this is okay. Where do we come up with this third concept? It's an interesting concept that shas hadachak. This all of a sudden there's like this new idea. In other words, was it kosher or wasn't it? I understand there's a concept of preferable, the best way to do it, and then the code. This is okay. But where do you have that? It's rare to have this type of a rule that there's the preferable way, there's the kosher way, and then there's in a time of great need, then all of a sudden, this is going to be, this is okay, but it's really not okay, because if you did it like that, you would have to go back and do it again. That's not a common. It's not so common to have such a thing. Normally, once you did it, if it's kosher, it's good enough. You should have done a preferable way. You did it, it's kosher. So here we have this interesting thing. So the commentaries debate on this case over here, and the opinion of the Ravid has a view here where he says that you really are not fulfilling the mitzvah. And when Reb Yehuda says this story, he says, the Ravid says, guess what? They did not make a bracha when they would shake this lulav. You inherited your lulav from your grandfather and you're using that for the mitzvah? No. B'shas hadchak, you're using it. This is called a time of great need, but don't make a bracha. You can't make a bracha. So why did they use it? So the Ravid says, you know why they used it? They used it because they are making sure that the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, the future generation shouldn't forget about a lulav. We can't get a lulav. We live here in, in Siberia. We live here somewhere where it doesn't grow lulavim, and they don't have UPS over here. And so, in the olden days, they didn't have these. It wasn't easy to get these type of species. So what would they do? They would have their grandchildren, their children would inherit their lulav. They would use it, but not because it's a mitzvah. It's called a zecher lemitzvah. So here you have an understanding of how you have this concept. In other words, this is not the normal law. This is a case where there's kosher, there's preferable, there's kosher, and then there's not kosher. This is not kosher, but it's used as a means to not forget the fact that a lulav is part of the 4 species, and therefore you should use it. Shaloi tishtakach mitzvahs lulav. You shouldn't forget about the mitzvah of lulav, and therefore you take it, but you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, and you can't make a bracha on it. And what happens if you shook lulav with it, and somehow a miracle happens, and some guy is passing through town, and he has a kosher lulav? You would go and recite a bracha on the second lulav, because your first lulav, you did not fulfill the mitzvah. You did a zecher, a commemoration of the mitzvah. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to take 4 species. You didn't do that. You didn't say a bracha. You can't say a bracha. Even if you said a bracha, it was a bracha in vain. And this is the way the Ravid learns this story. So Reb Yehuda understood it, that they're fulfilling the mitzvah. But the rabbi said this story is not a proof. It's called shas hadchak. In the way the rabbis are explaining shas hadchak is, you're not fulfilling a mitzvah. You're doing a commemoration that at least the grandchildren should know about it. What would someone do if they were in a place where you can't get the arba minim? You want future generations to know that there is a mitzvah. You want to remember and make a commemoration. You're in a case where you can't do it. Take the 4 species. Take the lulav. You have an old lulav. Okay, use it for this. Now we did have the next Gemara. Keep this in mind. We had in the next Gemara, we learned that you can't take a pomegranate. If you don't have a esrog, don't take a pomegranate. And the Gemara said, obviously not. The Gemara said, no, I would think that maybe you should take a pomegranate, because you don't want to forget the laws of esrog, that you need an esrog. And what does the Gemara answer? Zimnin nafik churba minei. There's going to be a problem that will come out of it, because asi lemisrach. It's going to cause you to cling to this and think that you are allowed to take a pomegranate. So therefore, you don't take a pomegranate. Don't take a a quince. You can't take other fruits. What do you mean? I don't have a fourth species. Nope, don't do it. Here, but lulav, this you do. Why do you take a non-kosher lulav? Because this is the correct species. It just happens to be it has to be happens to be not kosher because it's dried out, but it is the right species. And this is, we're not worried that a chorba is going to come out of it, a steak will come out of it. People are going to learn the wrong thing. Therefore, you would take it. So this is the opinion of the Ravid. This is the way the Ravid learns this Gemara. And the way he learns makes sense because, in other words, we can relate to it because it fits in with the general style of halacha that you normally have a lechatchila preferable way. You have a b'diavad, and that's not the preferable way, but if you did it, it's kosher. And the third thing is, it's not kosher. You didn't do a mitzvah. And that is the way the Ravid is learning this Gemara. That the story is they didn't fulfill a mitzvah. They shook the lulav, but they weren't doing a mitzvah. They were making sure that it doesn't get forgotten. Now, the Rosh argues on this. What does the Rosh hold? He says that they were yoitze, they fulfilled the mitzvah, b'shas hadchak, with a dried out lulav. But nevertheless, if there is a place where there are kosher lulavim, if you live in a place where there is kosher lulavs, there you would not be able to fulfill the mitzvah with this lulav that's dried out. The rabbis explained that hadar, beautiful, you can fulfill the mitzvah b'shas hadchak when there's no other way on this type of a lulav. But if it's not shas hadchak, if it's not a time of great need, then even if you shook with this, you did not fulfill the mitzvah, meaning if there are other lulavim in town, you have other, you're able to fulfill it otherwise, you did not fulfill the mitzvah with this. And according to the Rosh, it would seem that you're even reciting a bracha on it. Now, the Ar Sameach gives a little explanation to this Rosh. And he says, you know what the pshat of the Rosh is? He says, hadar, beautiful, is something that's relative. It's relative to what's available. In other words, there's beautiful in this situation in Siberia, and then there's beautiful in Florida or New York. Beautiful in New York is there's lulavim, unlimited, and there beautiful is can't be dried out. But this is the way he understands the Rosh to mean, that the rabbis said that there's a concept of shas hadchak, that, in other words, this is surprising to have such a rule. Shas hadchak, that at time of great need, all of a sudden the halacha changes. Where do you find this concept? It's normally not. There's normally the l'chtila and b'diavad, and shas hadchak and b'diavad normally go together. We connect the two. The time of great need is called like b'diavad. If you did it that way, you fulfilled the mitzvah. We normally combine these two types of situations where you already did it, okay, or you're in a time of great need. Okay, it's fine. It's kosher. You did it a kosher way. It's fine. All of a sudden here, our Gemara, it seems to be saying that there's a third option, that there's shas hadchak, that even though b'diavad you did not fulfill the mitzvah because you live in New York and you could go and get another lulav and shake in a lulav that's not dried out, that you didn't inherit from your grandparents. You could go in and buy one for, $20, $30 or even less. And go buy a lulav, get the lulav. Oh, you don't have one, it's Yantiv. Go borrow or go get a gift from your friend. Go to shul and you'll shake over there. That's the Evid. You shook with yours, too bad. You shook with your one you inherited. It's not good. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Go again and shake. B'di Evid, no, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Shas hadchak, you live somewhere else. It's impossible to get, and there's no UPS, and there's no this, and you didn't do it, or you forgot to order it, or whatever it is. Shas hadchak, then you fulfill the mitzvah with a grandfather's lulav. You're going to fulfill the mitzvah like that? It's rare to find these type of rules. So the Rosh says Well, the Rush says, well, Hadar, the rabbis explained that this is what Hadar is, that Hadar is that it should be not dried out. But if you're at a time of great need, Hadar works. It needs a little explanation. So the Ar Sameach gives a nice insight, and he says, Hadar, the way the Rush understands it, is it's something that's relative. Beautiful is something that's in the way the rabbis understood the word of the Torah Hadar to mean that it's relative. If you live in New York, this is called an ugly lulav. If you have your grandfather's lulav is not beautiful. But if you live in Siberia, that the rabbis said considered that is considered beautiful. It's considered that's considered a kosher lulav. You'll fulfill the mitzvah over there, meaning that it's relative, and therefore you could have a situation where it will be kosher here, but it won't be kosher there. Even after the fact, it won't be kosher there because it's a relative term. And so that's the understanding of the Or Sameach of how to reconcile and understand this type of a rule with a lulav that's dried out. Now, keep in mind that even if you say, like the Rush, that it's kosher, he's not koshering all different, anything wrong with the lulav that you could use it. He's saying this type of situation where it's dried out, that's kosher. That doesn't mean that some other issue with your lulav is going to make it kosher in the time of Shas Hadchak. The word hadar, something that has to do with the hadar, if it's connected to the concept of hadar, beautiful, then it would exempt you from it would permit you to use it, even though in New York or in Florida that won't be called hadar, it won't be called beautiful, but where you live that is beautiful. So again, what comes out from here is we have a machlokes, the Ravid and the Rush, how to learn this story and what the halacha would be if you are in a situation where it's called Shas Hadchak. Can you actually recite the bracha? And are you fulfilling the mitzvah? Are you fulfilling the mitzvah? According to the Ravid, you did not fulfill the mitzvah. According to the Rush, you fulfilled the mitzvah. Now, in the previous page, where we had the brisa of the Tosefta, where it says, on the previous page, meaning 31a, it said if you didn't find an esrog, so you can't use a pomegranate, you can't use a parish, a quince. Teves over there, he asked an interesting question based on this concept that I just discussed and elaborated on. He says, so what should you do? You don't have an esrog. You want to use a pomegranate? The Tosefta says don't. Why? Asi lamisrach, you're going to end up clinging to a pomegranate later, and people are going to start using pomegranates for their esrogs. No. Can't use a pomegranate. Don't use a quince. Not another fruit. Don't try to change a lemon. Nope. Don't use a lemon. No, that's not acceptable. Tosefta says, you know what you should use? Use a non-kosher esrog. In fact, the Tosefta doesn't give such an example. Tosefta doesn't say, don't use a pomegranate, don't use a quince, don't use a non-kosher esrog. It doesn't add that option. Why not? Because you should. You should use a non-kosher esrog. Says, why did the Tosefta give that option? It must be that if you don't find a kosher one, so you can't use a pomegranate. No. But you know what? Use a non-kosher esrog. And you know what? You can even say a bracha on it. You could even recite a bracha on the non-kosher esrog. You see, the Tosefta didn't say don't use it. So it sounds like if you have a non-kosher, in other words, the whole concept of a non-kosher esrog doesn't apply in a Shas Hadchak. Tosefta then says you could push off this proof because you could say that maybe a pomegranate And a quince, you would think, would be much better than a non-kosher esrog, because at least these are complete and beautiful. So maybe these would make more sense. So that's why the Tosefta gave these examples, but didn't give the example of an esrog that's non-kosher, which of course he can't use. But then he says, but we do see that a lulav, that if it's puzzle, but it's permissible to use the shas hadchak according to the rabbis. So he says, seemingly, you should be allowed to use a non-kosher esrog. So in other words, he starts off saying, seemingly you should be able to make a bracha on it, and you have a proof that the Tosefta doesn't say don't use it. So it would seem like you could use it. Like it would seem like that's acceptable in this scenario. Then he says not a proof, but he says, but you see from lulav. Where do you see from lulav? What I just was discussing with you, that you see that lulav, the rabbis held, you could recite, you could use a dried out lulav in shas hadchak. So this is from there. No, you can't bring a proof from the fact that it left out this example, but you can say that it should be similar to lulav, that it's permissible to use. Now, if he doesn't clarify if he means to recite a bracha, so I'm not exactly sure if he's concluding that you should even recite a bracha on it. He says that it's shari, it's permissible to use. It's a little vague if you should say a bracha. Is he learning like the Ravid or like the Rush? I would like to say that he's learning like the Rush, and you could say a bracha on it, because he seems to be encouraging you to do that. Yesh ledaktik the shari, kamay lulav pasal rabbanan like a lulav pasal rabbanan b'shas hadchak. Taisa seems to say that it should be permissible. It's not saying that you should do it as a shaloi tishtakach, not to forget the laws of the daled minim, of the laws of esrog. He's saying you should do it like to fulfill the mitzvah. Sounds like it sounds like to me like he's following the Rush's way, even though he doesn't clearly say to say a bracha. Yes, Jeffrey.
Well, since the entire institution of our practice, based on Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, is Zeicha Lemikdash, you already say a bracha in a way that wouldn't have been said in the time of the temple. So maybe that's the reason why you could still say a bracha, as long as you have the right mean. That you could say the same bracha, even if it's not hadar, and it's identifiable as, 2 years later, my esrog is very small and brown. I don't think that would be good. But if the pitum got broken and there was no way to get anything else, you had it shipped and it came, and a month before, and everything was fine until somebody dropped it. So then it sounds like to say the bracha.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it would need to be fit in the category of hadar, according to the way we're explaining the Rush. That it's based on hadar, meaning that hadar, beautiful, is a relative, right? Is a relative concept. So this could be maybe a scenario where you would say a bracha according to the Rush. However, if it was a different issue, like something that doesn't fall into the category of hadar, which is we're going to be learning about, like maybe chaser, if it's missing a chunk of it, things like that, you could, that doesn't fall into the same rule of an issue of hadar, of beauty. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is also the fact that this is rabbinic. I don't know if that changes it, because the rabbis seem to have included these rules, even at least many of them are applicable on all the days of Sukkot. You have to figure out which ones are exceptions. So on the one hand, you're right. There are exceptions that some rules are lenient on the other days of Sukkot, but not all of them. So the rabbis, it's well, of course, this is the subject of this is a work in progress. Really, we're in the midst of deciphering those things over the next few weeks or months maybe. So that's what we'll have to look out for. So that's a good point, Jeffrey, that there are cases that are permissible in the other days. The truth is, we are talking even on the first day. I mean, this is not excluding the first day, and seemingly that's the case here. Could be on all the days, not just the other days of Sukkot where it's rabbinic, but even on the first day where it's biblical. Okay, so anyway, getting back to our review over here. So that touches on if a person doesn't have what can they use it in a shas hadchak, and what this concept is, that there's like a third type of situation called is lechatchila b'diavad and then shas hadchak. Now the Gemara then said that you might think that Rabbi Yehuda holds lulav needs an eged, needs to be tied. So if you bring another min that's outside of this tie, so then maybe it's not a problem of maybe it's not a problem of Bal Tosef. And the Gemara's answer is that no, it would still be a problem of Bal Tosef. You can't use you can't add another species, even if it's not part of that tie. And there's a interesting point here, and that is that where do you see that something that's not part of that tie would also be part of the mitzvah and would be a problem if you're adding to the mitzvah? The esrog is not tied up with them, and it's still part of the four species. So the fact that the esrog is a species and it's not part of the tie, that sort of shows that even something else that you're holding that's not part of this bundle is still going to be a problem of Bal Tosef, adding on to the mitzvahs. You're adding a fifth species when there's only supposed to be four. Now, it's interesting what would happen, according to Reb Yehuda, if you just tied the lulav with one hadas, one myrtle, and one willow. According to Reb Yehuda, would you fulfill the mitzvah? As we see, the esrog is not part of it. Why is the esrog not part? According to Reb Yehuda, you need to tie it. According to rabbis, it's a nice thing to tie it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to do the mitzvah in a beautiful way. So you tie it. The Reb Yehuda learned, if you remember from page 11, we learned that Reb Yehuda holds it needs to be eged, it needs to tie it, and he learns it from v'lekachtem agudas ezoi, right? He learns gzeira shava. He learns it says one word here, and it says the same word there, the lekachtem. So therefore, you learn that just like by the when they left Mitzrayim that night, they put the blood on the doorposts, on their lintel doorposts. So the same thing is they tied a bundle of hyssop, the agudas ezov, a bundle of ezov, and so here also you need to tie. You need to tie these three species. So the thing is that that if you just need to tie three species, and it's learned from Gzeira Shava, seemingly you could fulfill the mitzvah with one hadas, one myrtle, and one arava, one tying those together, and the other you hold in your hand with the esrog. In other words, does it really need to be all the three species tied together in a bundle, or is it good enough? You have three species tied together in a bundle. The fact that we need two aravas, three hadasim, the fact you need two willows and two myrtles, they could be the other extras could be out as long as you're tying three together. This is sort of a sort of hinted to in our Gemara, where it says that whatever's outside of it is also part of the mitzvah, because as we know, with esrog, the esrog is it's still part of the mitzvah. So maybe the Sfas Emes brings this as a thought. Possibly you could fulfill the mitzvah that way. Again, of course, the proper way is to tie it all together. But the question would be, in theoretically, in Rabbi Yehuda's view, would it be good enough if you just tied one hadas and one arava? Maybe that could be good enough because you have three species tied together. That could fulfill the obligation that we learn from the Korban Pesach. Okay, now the Gemara then said about this concept of shaloi tishtakach tiras esrog, that you would think that you should bring a pomegranate. No, we're afraid that a churba is going to come from it. It'll cause some type of a destruction where you're going to make an obstacle for people. They're going to think that asi lamisrach, they're going to cling on to this idea of using a pomegranate for an esrog. Then the Gemara, then the Gemara said that we have a real proof against Rava's explanation, and the Gemara's proof was that we have a clear brisa. Tashema said esrog hayoshan is apostle. Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. That even an esrog that's old, which basically means dried out. In fact, some gersoi, some of the texts say esrog hayavish. There is such a girsa. But even if you learn that it's yoshan, it basically means that it's dried out. So it's going to be invalid, according to the rabbis. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's kosher. So this proves that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold it has to be beautiful. An esrog does not need to be beautiful. Even though it says hadar by an esrog, somehow Rabbi Yehuda holds an esrog doesn't need to be hadar, doesn't need it. We'll have to soon see why. But this proves Rava wrong. The Gemara says, Tiyufta, we've proven him wrong. And that was the conclusion over here on page 31b, that Rava's explanation of the debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is incorrect. The correct argument is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, esrog doesn't need to be hadar, and lulav, of course, also doesn't need to be hadar. They don't need to be, there's no rule of hadar, and therefore they can be dried out. It's not a problem. And now the Gemara continues debating this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. It says he holds you don't need to have hadar. We find that he does say it can't be green like a leek. And the Gemara says, yeah, that has to do with it has to be ripe. It's not ripe. That shows it's not ripe. Then the Gemara says, well, hadar, if it's too small, it's not good. Doesn't it have to? It probably has to do with hadar. Gemara says, no, it has to do with it's not ripe. It's not grown. It's full size. Then the Gemara says, what about the fact that if it's too big, the maximum size, the minimum, the maximum size is how big is the maximum size? So Gemara says, you see, Rabbi Yehuda holds it has to be hadar because he gives a maximum size, two in one hand. So the Gemara says that this is not his reason. It's not because of beauty. It's because we're afraid you're going to switch hands and it's going to fall and it's going to be a problem. So therefore, it's nothing to do with hadar. So it says the main question: what about the fact that the pasuk says hadar? The pasuk tells you it has to be hadar. So how does he get around that? There's a nice amount of loopholes in other things. You want to find the loopholes, one thing, but here the pasuk says clearly, it says hadar. The Gemara answers, yeah, hadar doesn't mean beautiful. It means hadar. It dwells on its tree from year to year. That doesn't fall off. It seems to stay on its tree. And Rashi over here says, there's no other fruit that does this. That it seems like it dwells on its it stays and it doesn't fall off.
But what about
from here we know this means an esrog. No other fruit does this. That's how Rashi says it. I'm sorry. What did you say something, Ezra?
Yeah, pomegranate.
A pomegranate is the same. It also doesn't fall off the tree. Okay. Well, we'll get to that in a second. I see Mordechai's had his hand up for a while. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, isn't there a story that with Rabbi Akiva before he became a Talmud Chacham, he had an esrog that was so large that he carried it on his shoulder?
I'm not familiar with the story. Sounds good. We'll have to look into that. That's an interesting one.
Some of those pictures we saw the other day were that big.
Right. All right. So getting back to Ezra's question, so there's a little discussion here about this that no other tree is like this. I know there's a discussion about it because, like, what exactly does it mean? The Ra'ah says that we find other trees have other fruits have the similar thing. They can stay a long time. So the Ra'ah says that this is called an asmachta. It's not a proof like Rashi says. This is a proof that Hadar creates Hadar means an esrog. The Ra'ah says no. There's other fruits that also, like Ezra's telling us, there's other fruits that also have it. So it must be that the fact that it's Hadar Bilana, meaning we really have a tradition. We have a tradition when Yeshua took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, they shook. They used they knew what the tree was. They're supposed to shake the lulav with. They used an esrog. They had a tradition. They knew that that's what it was meant. It says Hadar Bilane Mishana Lashana. That's more of what's called an asmachta. It's like a hint that one of those fruits is an esrog. Esrog does live on the tree, but it's not the only tree. So we know that it refers to an esrog from our tradition, but nevertheless, the drasha Hadar Bilani Mishana Lashana is what's called an asmachta, and the word Hadar, he says. It actually means, we when I say a tradition, it doesn't mean halacha Moshe Sinai. It means that we know what the word hadar really refers to an esrog, not just because we know what the Eibishter wants. The actual word hadar in Hebrew is, according to the Ra'ah, the word hadar means an esrog, and he brings a proof that it says it means, because esrog means nechmad. If you look in the Targum, in the Aramaic of the word nechmad lamara, Bereshis, so it says nechmad lamara, that the one by the Eitz Hadas, tree that was enticingly looked really pleasuresome, looked very pleasuresome. That word chemda, that word nechmad, that is Aramaic mirageg. Mirageg is from the word esroig. Interesting. So he says the word esroig really is Aramaic for, in Hebrew, it would mean hadar. Hadar is similar to nechmad, and so in Hebrew the word hadar is what's in Aramaic esroig, and therefore he says it must mean that it must be that hadar itself means an esrog. The Gemara uses an asmachta like a drasha, that it says that it's hadar beilani mishana lashana, that it also has this unique characteristic that's not unique only to this tree, but it is unique. It's something special. It's not all trees have this. Other trees also might have it, but it's hinted to in the word hadar that it's hadar bilan shal. But the word hadar really is connected to the word esrog, and that's what it means. And it's not based on the fact that it's hadar bilan shal. That's not the basis to use that as esrog. Hadar means esrog. We have a tradition that's what the word means. The word means esrog is based on the meaning of the word, that this is Aramaic for the Hebrew word, and a hadar, and the hadar refers to an esrog, and so that's how we understood. So we have such a understanding. Yes, Yehuda.
Yeah, doesn't the Megillah tell us that that was one of the names of Esther?
Hadassah, not hadar.
Oh,
Hadassah.
oh, okay. Never mind.
No problem. You're close, because instead of esrog, the hadassim,
Right.
hadassim of the very close, very close. So, okay. So anyway, that's the discussion over here about the esrog. We will talk a little more about it, about the meaning of the word esrog later on. The Gemara is going to mention about it could mean water. Hadar from the word idor. There's other there's Gemaras later that we'll discuss it. So we'll get to them soon. But in the meantime, the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda, he seems to understand it to mean hadar be'ilane mishana l'shana.
You understand what he's saying? I think what he's saying is hador be'ilana mishana l'shana. He's making it the word dar, that means you live in a place like dira. He's reinterpreting the word that it's she-dor. Hadar.
Right. I'm saying that's how we learned it. I'm not sure if you're adding something. What are you adding something?
I didn't understand from the explanation before that it wasn't an adjective hadar.
No. Right. The word. Well, there's two things we said. Number one is the word hadar, according to the commentary of the Ra'ah, was that hadar does mean an esrog. That's what they understand, that it means an esrog. How do they it's based, it's connected to the fact esrog is Aramaic and hadar means nechmad, and Aramaic nechmad is translated as esrog. So they basically know that hadar means so that's the real source, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, that it's referring to an esrog. That's the real source.
Right.
But the wording of the Gemara and the way Rashi learned it is that the source is because it's hadar, like what you're saying, which I think is, I thought I said that, but hadar be'ilana mishana l'shana is that the word hadar doesn't mean beautiful. It's a combination of the word dar with a prefix called ha. Hadar be'ilana mishana l'shana, that it lives on the tree from year to year, that it lasts or through all the seasons of the year. That's the concept of the esrog.
It's not really a prefix, even though in Hebrew it gets put on the front of the word. It's really a relative pronoun, which means that.
I'm sorry. Okay.
If you want to be very specific.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I can't fight with you on that. That's beyond my grammar knowledge. Okay. It's cool. Okay. So in any event, it's not part of the root
for me to realize. I all of a sudden I realized.
Okay. It's not part of the root word.
Correct.
That's the point. Okay.
Correct.
So hadar be'ilana mishana l'shana, that's what the Gemara says. The way Rashi understands it is this is the source that Rabbi Yehuda has, that it means an esrog. That's how Rashi understands it. Maybe in Rashi's cities they didn't have the pomegranates. I don't know. I mean, or he didn't see. Yeah, maybe he didn't see those type of trees. I don't know. But that's how Rashi learns it. Okay. Now,